Magnificent Obsession by Lloyd C. Douglas. Chapter 12. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, early September. The last of the summer trippers had gone, reluctant to leave all this beauty behind them and pledged to a prompt return, with their hands filled with bulky bouquets of garden flowers graciously bestowed by long-time servants who seemed sincerely regretful over their departure. They had edged along the slippery seats of the station bus to make room for the tardy, scurrying back from one last look at the blue bay from the terrace wall. They would go down the hill to Bellagio, cross the bay to Menaggio, and take a funny little funicular over the mountain en route west and home. The Via Serbelloni was very quiet this morning. Not that it was at any time a rackety place, even when filled to its small capacity. There was something about the ineffable tranquility of the old mansion that slowed one down to its leisurely tempo, that mellowed the voice and blurred the vision. Its atmosphere seemed strangely sedative, giving a curious unreality to the whole region. One felt that one's self walking about through a carrot. The changing cloud shadows on the mountains and the bay, synchronized with warming wisps of autumn breeze, played unaccountable tricks with one's estimates of distances and hours. One never knew certainly whether it was Tuesday or Thursday or cared. Somebody had declared it was as if the picture were blurry, out of focus. There were no sharp, angular lines either to the purple hills or the turquoise lake below. The very pebbles on the carriage drive were unreal, each wrapped with a tiny, shimmering aureole of pale opal. Each grape in the shapely clusters dependent on the trellis sheltering the breakfast nook was encircled by an amber nimbus as if glowing with some inner radiance. An excellent place for daydreaming. To appreciate it properly, however, the guest must bring to the little arbor a quiet, unworried mind, else the timeless calm of the place would only accentuate the internal tumult. Unless one were at peace with himself, here, he could be more desperately lonely and depressed than in a desert. The arbor was all but deserted. Except for the elderly English couple at the last table in the row against the low terraced wall, absorbed in their letters, groping occasionally for the handles of their coffee cups, Helen Hudson had the place to herself. She was so lonesome she watched with comradely concern the antics of the ambitious bee that disputed her right to the little jar of honey. It might never be determined where was the next to the loveliest spot in the world. La Jolla? Lake Louise? The Columbia River Highway? Royal George? Grand Canyon? During her 3 years abroad, Helen had successfully shifted her allegiance from the Grand Canal under a full moon to the Upper Cornish Road, the Amalfi Drive, the Neckar glimpsed through the treetops from the crumbling balconies of Heidelberg Castle. But there could never be any doubt about the loveliest scene in the world. She faced it. Lake Como. From the little arbor flanking on the east, the Via Serbelloni, on the hill crest overlooking Bellagio, looked at it without seeing it today, for her eyes were preoccupied. Her morning mail had practically confirmed certain harassing suspicions. It was reasonably sure now that Monty had been manipulating her estate to her serious disadvantage. How to protect herself against grave misfortune, if indeed that misfortune had not already been guaranteed, without plunging her family into disgraceful publicity, was too intricate a problem to be solved. Not at any time since her commitment of all her affairs to Monty, upon his renewed persuasion a year ago, had his remittances been in full of her expectations. When, in January, he had written that Northwestern Copper was in the midst of a reorganization, which was temporarily distressing its value and reducing its dividends, she had been disposed, albeit puzzled, to accept his statement as correct. She made no pretense of understanding the explanation he offered, with an infinitude of befuddling detail phrased in a jargon utterly incomprehensible. The situation troubled and inconvenienced her, but she had tried to believe what Monty said. There was nobody at hand to query, no one she cared or dared to consult by correspondence. She had made Monty her business agent with full power of attorney. She was in his hands to do with as he pleased. It was most disturbing. In mid-July, he had written lengthily his deep regret and disappointment that Northwestern Copper was making so slow a recovery, still in a tangle of reorganization difficulties, refinancing problems, the tiresome delays of senseless litigation. Monty was grifted with an extraordinary capacity for redundant ambiguities. In short, Northwestern Copper had passed its small annual period of accounting to its stockholders without declaring any dividend at all. He was sorrier than he could say, but of course, it wasn't his fault. Stunned to the realization that she was alone in a foreign country without income or any assurance that it might be restored, she had spent whole days fretting about her next move in this awkward predicament. It had occurred to her that something might be liquidated of her holdings at Brightwood. She was aware that her inherited stock in the hospital had no market value. It was not at all like ordinary commercial or industrial securities. The income was small and uncertain, the stock itself being worth just what some philanthropic purchaser might be willing to pay for it. Moreover, there was a sentimental value attached to it in her mind. Under no circumstances, short of actual pressing need, would she have consented to part with it. But, sentiment or no sentiment, she would have to live. Her funds were very low. After a month of worry, she had written to Nancy Ashford, rejecting, after some debate, the thought of confiding the exact state of her affairs. She limited her inquiry to the possibility of converting her Brightwood stock into cash at the earliest moment a purchaser could be found. Mrs. Ashford would be surprised and disappointed, doubtless, but she would have to think what she liked about it. The real reason could not be divulged.
Now, I wonder exactly why she wants to do that,
Nancy had said to Dr. Merrick upon receipt of it.
Surely she has enough to live on. The income of her Northwestern Copper can't be a penny less than $6,000 a year. Preferred stock, sound as Gibraltar. Do you suppose somebody has been defrauding her? She knows so little about business.
Who's handling her affairs while she's gone?
Nobody. So far as I know, there's nothing very complicated about her business. I think she said her brother, her cousin rather, would assist her in making out her income tax report.
Do you know anything about him?
Not a thing. Might he be handling her money?
Unlikely. Why should he? Unless she gave him carte blanche to buy and sell. And she wouldn't do that.
What shall I say to her, Bobby?
How much is her Brightwood stock worth?
Conservatively?
Nancy grinned. No, optimistically. A Micawber appraisal.
About 20,000, I should think. Want it?
Yes. You tell her you have contracted to dispose of her Brightwood stuff for $25,000. Tell her the man wishes to pay for it in 25 monthly installments. That will insure her against being broke over there. And meantime...
Yes, meantime?
Dr. Merrick moved towards the door. Oh, I don't know. I'm sure. It's her affair. Again, Helen took up the long letter she had just received from Mrs. Ashford with its life-saving enclosure and the definite promise of more to come. The possession of it filled her with misgivings. She had snapped an important tie connecting her with Dr. Hudson's most cherished interest. It was like closing a door on something he had lived for. There was no reproach in the letter, either direct or implied. easy to detect a note of anxiety, however.
I hope this disposal of your Brightwood stock does not mean that your income from other sources is any way depleted. Is there anything you would like to have us look after for you?
Following the briefly clear statement of the deal she had made and the terms of the sale, Nancy Ashford had served up a potpourri of local news. You wouldn't know Detroit. New clubs, new theaters, swagger hotels, metropolitan shops. Even the hospital was adding a new unit. Plans already drawn.
Young Dr. Merrick is with us now. Oh, perhaps you knew that. Of course it is a delight to me to see the rapid progress he is making, for I've always been interested in him. Naturally, he has a great advantage over the typical intern because, having known from the first day of his medical course that he was going in for brain surgery, he comes here with more specialized knowledge and experience than any other young doctor who ever joined our organization. Already Dr. Pyle is treating him with a deference that amuses me. Dr. Pyle is so short with the cubs. Bobby got permission to fit up a little laboratory of his own. There was a small alcove, perhaps you recall, just off the main solarium over the top wall. We had it partitioned. You should see the apparatus he has installed. It's more of a physical than a chemical laboratory, I think. Glass blowing, a forge, a blast furnace, all manner of electrical things. You can't get any information out of him. I was in there yesterday and asked him if he was making a new radio set, and he said something like that. But that doesn't mean much when he says it, except that he wishes you wouldn't bother him. Oh, I never had a bigger thrill in my life than at his graduation. I had hoped so much for him all along, and when it came to the big day, with his name starred on the commencement program, he hadn't said a word to me about his taking second honors. Well, I just sat there and wept silly tears. His mother couldn't come, so I pretended I was his mother. And you should have seen his grandfather. Proud? When the class marched across the platform for their diplomas, dear old Mr. Merrick stood in his seat trying to wave his handkerchief and blow with it at the same time, until somebody pulled him down by the coat-tails.
The sheets trembled in Helen's hands as she read. The last line on that page, it was numbered 8, had been scratched out but was still legible.
The young doctor who received...
The next page had been originally numbered 12. That had also been ineffectually deleted in favor of time. On second thought, Nancy Ashford had omitted a considerable part of her letter. Here's the draft for that 1,000. Bobby Merrick had said as he stood by Nancy's desk.
Thanks. I've just finished writing to her. I'll get it off today.
That's good. By the way, you said nothing about the Dawsons, did you?
Why, yes. Rather I'd not.
Leave it out. I don't think she'd be interested much, and well, I have a reason.
As you like,
said Nancy, hastily extracting the pages on which she had written.
First honors is Dr. Merrick's closest friend, Damon and Pythias. The kind of friendship you read about. They work together throughout their medical course, same specialty. First honors now carry a prize offered by Mr. Owen Simmons, Simmons Turbine Company, a year in Vienna, all expenses, scholarship, liberal allowance, etc. The Dawsons were here last Thursday, the day your letter came. She was going to New York to see her husband off. Actually, the 3 of them were like brothers and sister. I couldn't help being jealous. They were closeted here in my office for the whole hour, and when they came out, and I met them in the hall, Mrs. Dawson was all excited. She seemed so happy that I said, "You look like Christmas morning." "Why shouldn't I?" she replied, laughing. "I'm going along." "To Europe?" "Absolutely." They have a dear little boy going on 4. I never saw a child so beautifully trained. Dr. Merrick went along with them to New York and brought little Jack back with him to stay at Windermere until Mrs. Dawson returns. I dare say old Mr. Merrick can be found at this minute leading the pony he has bought for him.
There was a letter from Joyce.
No, darling, I'm sure you'll take no pleasure in thinking of saying, "I told you so," for that wouldn't be you. Never a day passes that I do not scourge myself for the abominable way I used you that winter when you were trying so hard to step in between me and myself. I wasn't fair to anybody through those days. Not even to poor Bobby. I never told you the straight of that. I meant to, but, you see, I telephoned to him the next morning and asked him to come and see me. I'd had a hazy notion that he was, well, kind to me the night before, and I thought he might renew our friendship. He made some excuse. I was hurt and humiliated. I knew something had happened to cause an estrangement between you and Bobby for... Can you forgive me, darling? I noticed a letter you had from him shortly afterward and peeked into it. He wanted to be forgiven for causing you a lot of suffering. I knew that he meant he hadn't told you all the truth. You see, he was in that South party at Gordon's, and I just let you think so after he refused to see me again. The honest fact that was he went there sober and fought everybody in the place to get me out when I was so blind drunk I didn't really learn what it was all about for 3 days. I know Bobby means nothing to you and that you despise him, but it's only fair to him that you should know how he happened to bring me home that Thanksgiving night. Now, darling, it's not any better. It's never going to get any better. I know that now. Tommy can't help it. One night he comes home drunk, surely, and obstinate, and next night drunk, silly, and sentimental. The next night drunk, argumentative and critical. Next night drunk, savage and abusive. But always drunk. I can definitely count on that. I never know what mood he'll be in, whether I'm to be upbraided for imagined indifference to him and his work, little enough he does of it, or pestered with pretenses of an affection neither of us feels, but I can always be sure of one thing. He will be drunk. At first, he claimed he wrote better when stimulated, and I believed him, drank with him, all times of the day in all sorts of places with all kinds of people. He said it helped him to the local color necessary to the story writing. I took his word for it. And then I saw that it was rapidly doing him up. He was losing his magazine market. His things began to come back with curt little notes. I hated to nag him, but the time came when I had to rebel against being dragged about with this greasy crowd of drunken pretenders as some sort of literary or artistic talent, would-bes and has-beens. Now he's out on his own, doing little or nothing. Thank God we don't have to worry about the rent or where the next meal's coming from. Dear old Dad saw to that. So long as they continue to mine copper in the Upper Peninsula, Tommy and I can go through the motions of living. But it's a dull business, and life has gone flat. I would leave him tomorrow, if it were not that I would feel under a sort of obligation. I'm as much responsible for his habits as anyone. What would you do in my place?
So, nothing whatever ailed Northwestern Copper or Joyce would be having trouble with her dividends. She would write to Monty and press some serious questions. Had Monty volunteered to look after her business with the purpose of appropriating her income? Why had she not sought counsel before putting herself at his mercy? There were plenty of reliable trust companies. Perhaps there was an explanation. Well, he should have his chance to offer it. Very soon, too. She would write today. No, tomorrow. She wasn't up for it today. So he was taking Brightwood by storm, was he? Glass blowing? Whatever for? What had surgery to do with glass blowing? Why hadn't he told the truth about that episode at Gordon's? She was glad his letter of apology had been too vague for Joyce to understand. Poor Joyce. Gathering up her mail, she rose from the table and smiled at old Martino as he drew back her chair, strolled down the winding carriage drive. The gay little parasol refused to share her trouble and brightened her face. She descended into the narrow flight of steps to the next level of the mountain road that spiraled up from the village, followed a graceful arc of it to the second long flight, which widened to a street flanked by picturesque little shops. Yesterday she had promised herself that this morning she would make an excursion to the Via Carlotta. Diagonally across the bay on a heavily wooded shore of indescribable beauty, the famous home of an absentee prince was open to tourists. Some important canavas, some rare orchids, a wide variety of exotics. She must see them. Everyone did. There was no lack of attentive service as she stepped down into the red and blue canopied motorboat. It required many assistants at the little wharf in front of Via Carlotta to attend to her disembarkation. The diminutive parasol was handed up to the nearest member of the reception committee. The Baedeker in its leather cover was passed to another. The field glasses on a strap were unslung from her shoulder, and, regretting with a gesture of dismay that there was nothing further to take off, she reached up both hands and permitted the envied pair who remained uncommissioned to help her over the gunwale. Smilingly collecting her possessions, she ascended to the huge iron gates and into the coolness of the great hall, sealed, walled, floored with white marble. A young American woman, about her own age, possibly a little older, was seated on a graceful marble bench, the only place in the room where one might sit, intent upon the famous Cupid and Psyche. She was modish in a gray tailored suit with close-fitting gray hat fringed with tawny curls. With a brief glance, they took each other's measure, nodded, smiled. Helen sat down beside her. "It's the best thing he did, don't you think?" ventured the girl in gray. "Exquisite." Well, she ought to know what things were exquisite, reflected Marion. The word described herself. Somewhere in this vicinity she expected to meet a young woman with blue eyes, long lashes, blue-black hair, possibly coiffed in what was known as a wind-blown bob, a smile as tantalizing as Mona Lisa's, and a voice that made you think of a cello. "Bobby, for heaven's sakes," she had protested, "are you sure it isn't like a heavenly harp?" "Well, something like that," he had agreed. "What else is there to see?" she inquired, after a long silence. "I never was here before," Helen replied. "The gardens, I think, and some foreign trees and ferns. Shall we look? You're alone, aren't you?" "Quite. Alone and lonesome." The patter of their heels echoed through the spacious corridor as they sought the autumn sunshine. On the terrace they hesitated, inquired of an attendant, and took the broad path northward through the artfully landscaped gardens. "You came over from Bellagio?" She had. Last night she had arrived from Lugano and was stopping at a little hotel in the village. Thought she'd stay a week, perhaps. "Oh, then you must move up to Via Serbelloni. I'd be so happy if you did." Immediately they had disclosed their identities. Their budding friendship developed with all the rapidity natural to a meeting of two lonely fellow countrymen in a foreign land. Young Mrs. Dawson's story was quickly told. "He'll be all the better for not having me to bother with until he settles into his routine," she explained. "And anyways, it's my first experience of Europe. I want to ramble about and see things." "Queer you should have to come to Bellagio direct from Paris. I'm glad you did, of course, but there's nothing here but an amazingly fine view. People don't, they go to, down into the chateau country or along the Riviera, Rome, Naples, Florence. How did you happen to come here?" "I read about it in a book, long time ago. Always wanted to come here." It was fun to search for mutual interests. Dr. Dawson had just finished the medical school in June. His first honors had taken him to Vienna. Brain surgery, that was his specialty. Helen had had a letter just this morning from a friend in Detroit who knew intimately the young doctor taking second honors in that class. Without doubt, Dr. Dawson knew him well. "Merrick?" Marion's brows wrinkled in an attempt at remembrance. "Oh, yes, tall, serious chap, wasn't he? But you never met him?" "I've seen him. I think that describes him pretty well." "What a duck of a grotto! Let's go down." They descended from the mossy, fern-fringed enclosure and rested on the circular stone seat facing a stucco pan on a graceful pedestal. "What did he have to be so serious about?" queried Helen.
Helen. "Surely things should have come easy enough for him." "Do you think he looks so serious? Why, he's the most roguish thing I ever saw. Serious? With that impish grin." "Oh, you mean Pan. He's a little devil." "And you were still thinking about young Miss Dr. Merrick." Marion pinioned her lower lip in an understanding smile and mysteriously half-closed one eye. "Maybe he wasn't serious after all. He wouldn't need to be. Awfully rich, isn't he?"
They wandered on, occasionally coming upon delicious surprises. A short flight of worn steps by a wall mantled with Banksian roses descending to a shady water gate, a little classic pavilion, the flagging strewn with fugitive yellow leaves. Marion loosened her imagination, prattling of romances and intrigues sheltered by these sequestered nooks through the years.
"He's at Brightwood now," observed Helen,
at the first full stop in her new friend's rhapsody.
"That was Dr. Hudson's hospital, so naturally I'm interested."
"Yes, you would be." Marion smiled cryptically.
It was far past noon now. The little boat that had brought Helen over was moored at the wharf. They were helped into it. Neither spoke for a full 5 minutes, Helen regarding the silver trail on the placid water, Marion's eyes held by the lovely terraces and the gates of the villa.
"I think," said Marion dreamily, "that this is the most wonderfully beautiful place I ever saw."
"What I can't understand,"
Helen's face was a study in perplexity,
"is how they could have helped knowing each other intimately, taking the honors together, and specializing in the same thing. A very restricted field, too."
Marion turned and regarded her with a slow smile.
"If I'd known I was ever to find somebody who was so interested in him, I'd have made it my business to get acquainted. Let's poke about in some of those funny little shops before we go up. Want to?"
Marion Dawson went to her room that night. She had moved up to the villa, with many troublesome misgivings. So far as the success of her mission was concerned, it was assured. Bobby had sent her to find out the whole truth about Helen's financial misfortunes and to put him on the track of their possible remedy. He had confided that his interest was in the main philanthropic. Had Dr. Hudson lived, she would not have met this disaster, and Dr. Hudson's death was more or less chargeable to him. At least he admitted a heavy responsibility. Her welfare was his concern.
"Sure there isn't any more to it than that, Bobby?" she had teased.
"I wish there was more to it," he had confessed. "But there can't be. I've quite put that idea out of my mind. Frankly, she hates the sight of me." It hadn't required much feminine intuition to discover that Bobby's estimate of Helen Hudson's attitude towards him was exactly wrong. How she could delight him if she wished, with an impressionistic report of today's conversation, but that wouldn't be fair. Precisely where it was her allegiance in this matter. It was traitorous enough to extract Helen's confidence about her money difficulties, but that would be ultimately to her advantage. When she learned, if she ever did, how her financial anxieties were relieved, she would not question the method. But she would never forgive a breach of confidence about her interest in Bobby. Really, it was most unpleasant being a spy. All afternoon they had been together, rambling in and out of the crooked little streets. At 4, grinding laboriously up the hill in the ancient fiacre with the high, steel-tired wheels. At 7, tarrying over their dinner in the arbor, each conscious of a friendship destined, they felt, to become very valuable. Helen had insisted upon her having a room next to her own, on the south side where the big balconied window looked out upon the bay. Tomorrow they were having an early breakfast so that they could catch the little steamer on its first trip of the day to Como. "I'd flick this job tonight," wrote Marion, "and come straight home if it wasn't that I knew my detective work would benefit her. She's been terribly lonely, awfully troubled, and she's going to tell me all about it in the next few days. I won't have to ask her a single question. She's going to tell me of her own accord. But I do feel so mean, Bobby, with this deception. What an adorable creature she is. I never met anybody to whom I was so quickly drawn. Please, don't ever let her find out my part in this. I don't believe I could bear it if she learned I had cultivated her for a purpose. The shopkeepers in Little Bellagio became quite accustomed to the sight of two remarkably attractive young American women in their streets, and the skippers of the pleasure craft plying Lake Como were proud to have them for frequent passengers. Every morning they breakfasted together in the arbor. Every evening they strolled arm in arm through the lovingly tended gardens of the hotel. There was a very little about each other's story that they did not know now. Their confidences had been tender, girlish, unreserved. It was no ordinary friendship. From the first moment they had been irresistibly attracted and made no effort to sustain the reticence each would have felt naturally toward a stranger. All forenoon of that tragic Tuesday, which they were to remember with agony, they had hiked along a tortuous mountain road to Menagio. Helen had laid bare her whole dilemma in the case of her business dealings with Monty and was strongly counseled to wait a while and do nothing until her return to the States, seeing that her income was assured for the present. With the bars all down, she talked freely about Bobby, too, confessing by her tone all that she had hesitated to put into words. It began to rain after luncheon. They agreed upon a siesta and went to their rooms. An hour later, Helen, having wakened, decided to write some letters. She remembered she had left her guidebook in Marion's room. Quietly turning the knob and finding the door unlocked, she tiptoed across the room, smiling at the sleeping face on the pillow, and took up her Baedeker from the writing desk. Beside it, stamped and ready for mailing, was a bulky letter addressed to Dr. Robert Merrick, Brightwood Hospital, Detroit, Michigan, USA. She was stunned. As if someone had dealt a blow to her heart, scarcely able to breathe, she groped her way blindingly out of the room, so fearful of rousing Marion that she left the door ajar rather than risk rattling the latch. For a long time she sat on the edge of her bed, shoulders bowed, hands listless on her knees. The world had caved in. With hot cheeks, she recalled some of the things she had whispered to Marion Dawson, confidences no Inquisition machine could have twisted out of her. Doubtless all these impulsive confessions had been spread on paper to satisfy the curiosity of Bobby Merrick. It was clear enough now. What an odd coincidence, they had thought it, she and Marion, that they had been brought together in this accidental way, and found the dearest friendship either of them had ever known. Coincidence, indeed. Marion slept heavily until 5 and roused with the uneasy sensation that something unpleasant had occurred. It was raining torrents. The room was dark. A strong draft was blowing through. The door was open. She distinctly remembered having closed it. Suddenly she gasped and clutched at her throat with both hands. She walked with short, reluctant steps to the desk. Helen's Baedeker was gone. It would have been impossible for her to recover it without noticing the letter. She flung herself across the bed, swept with remorse. A half hour later, frantically drumming on her temples with her fingers, she resolved to take the letter to Helen and beg her to read it. She would tell the whole story, and try to explain how she came to be involved in this benevolent treachery. Heart-pounding, face-flushed, she tapped at Helen's door and received no response, tried the latch, and found it locked. Returning to her room, she nervously dressed for dinner and went slowly down the winding staircase, searched the lounge, glanced into the dining room, finally summoned her courage to approach the desk of the concierge. "Has Mrs. Hudson come down?" she asked with a dry throat. "She has gone, madame. You did not know." "Gone? You mean she has left the hotel?" "About 4 o'clock, madame." "But where?" "She left no address, madame. She said she would send for her trunks later." Marion turned slowly away and retraced her steps spiritlessly to the foot of the stairs, then, after some hesitation, came again to the desk. "Will you see if there's a message for me?" Obediently, he went through the motions of inspecting several pigeonholes on the wall behind him and thumbed a pack of letters, looking for something neither of them expected he would find. It poured hard all night, and the Via Serbelloni, if not the loneliest place in the world, was a close runner-up to the Continental Hotel in Milan for that destination. Chapter 13. The girl with the pink hair, languorous lashes gummy with an overdose of mascara, and ugly black muffins over her ears was informing Mr. Brent that a Dr. Merrick was in the lobby and wished to see him. No, he hadn't said.
Mr. Brent's dressing for dinner and can't come down, she said coyly, with one hand over the mouthpiece. He says you can tell him on the phone what you want. Just step into booth number 2, please.
Tell him I'll be right up.
She relayed the message, while the tall young man, with the shoulders of a discus thrower and the tapering waist of a fencer, tapped the high counter in front of the switchboard with slender, impatient fingers. He says it won't be convenient, she reported, visibly reluctant to transmit the blunt discourtesy.
What's his room number? Inquired Dr. Merrick, unruffled.
378, but he said he couldn't see you, you know.
Here, boy, to the bellhop at his elbow. Put these bags in check, and then show me up to 378. Mr. Brent was not dressing for dinner. He was packing a trunk. And chairs, bed, table were littered with clothing, papers, books, toilet articles, and mussy linen. The room was in great disorder. It was with a very surly scowl that he opened the door to inspect his visitor. Merrick, you say? Never heard of you. What's wanted? He planted his short, stocky bulk defiantly in the doorway, hands on his hips. Ask me in and I'll tell you, said Merrick quietly. Brent reluctantly stepped back.
Very well, he snapped peevishly. But make it peppy. I'm busy, as you see. Thought I'd send word down that I didn't care to be bothered.
The loud, checked coat that matched the trousers he had on was lifted from the back of a chair and tossed on the bed.
Sit down, if you want to.
Young Merrick ignored the sour invitation and proceeded to state his errand. I live in Detroit, where I am associated with Brightwood Hospital. Brent's face, pallid and bristly with 2 days' beard, went a shade paler.
Yeah?
You may recall that Brightwood Hospital was brought into prominence by your cousin's late husband, Dr. Hudson.
Well, and then what?
Growled Brent insolently. It came to our attention about 30 days ago that Mrs. Hudson, now in Italy, as you know, was obliged to dispose of her interest in the hospital.
And how's that any of your damn business?
Demanded Brent, stepping towards Merrick belligerently. You're just a doctor, aren't you?
Couldn't she sell a hospital stock if she wanted to, without consulting you?
Quite true, replied Merrick, determined not to lose his temper. She had no occasion to confide in me, and didn't. But if we are interested in her welfare, I should think that might meet with your approval. You've been managing her affairs, haven't you?
Yeah, and I don't need any help.
I happen to know that you do. That's what I came here to talk about.
And what makes you so powerfully interested in my cousin? Brent sneered. Trying to get your fingers on her money?
The fingers were restless. I advise you not to presume too far on my patience, Brent.
When you get too impatient, you can leave. You want to marry my cousin, I suppose, but have to make sure first that she has plenty to keep you.
Just for the moment, cautioned Merrick. We'll not be talking about Mrs. Hudson. We're going to talk about you and that Northwestern copper stock.
What do you mean, you low-down sneaking spy?
I mean that in the last 12 months you've lost upwards of $100,000 on the ticker and the ponies. That last big flyer in oil, long in May, wasn't it? Wiped out the Northwestern copper completely. I'm here, as Mrs. Hudson's friend, to find out exactly what you propose to do about it. Brent's face was livid. He stamped to the door and threw it open.
Now, out you go, damn you, or I'll call the house detective.
Merrick turned to the untidy desk and took up the telephone. I'll save you the trouble, he said quietly, lifting the receiver.
Put that down!
Screamed Brent, slamming the door. Merrick smiled and obeyed. You're not anxious to talk to a detective, Brent, but you're going to talk to me. Do you want to come clean on all this now? Tell me about it? Or do I have to break you in two over that table? I can do it, and I'd like to. Blind with fury, Brent lunged savagely with his fist. Stepping aside to let it go by, Merrick caught the shaking wrist in a vice-like grip of his left hand. With the other, he gathered up a large handful of Brent's throat, pushed him to the table, and bent him over it. Back. Back farther, until the purpled neck was corded with distended veins, and his labored breathing signed it was a good time to ease up. Like to talk business now? Brent raised heavily to one elbow, and his hand fumbled in the desk drawer. Drop that gun! Merrick closed down on the wrist until Brent's fingers released their hold on the automatic. Fell to the floor. That shooting project cost you extra. Once more, Brent's Adam apple and the environs were compressed until his breathing came in agonized little whistles. Merrick stooped and picked up the gun, emptied it, pocketed the cartridges, and waited for his host to recover. After some minutes, he sat up, rubbed his bloodshot eyes clumsily with his fists, and felt gingerly of his neck. Well, he croaked, now you've proved you're bigger than I am. What do you want? I'm no bigger than you are, Brent. Your trouble was that you rushed me with your eyes shut. Just took a long chance that maybe, somehow, your blow would land. It's probably what ails you all along the line. You close your eyes and wang away, hoping you'll strike something by accident. That afterthought of yours about the gun? You'd be in a nice mess by now if you had let you shoot me. Some little gambler you are. I'd rather take the chance on the chair and the pen. That proves what I'm saying. And speaking of chairs and pens, crawl over there to your desk and sit down. I'm going to have you write something for me. If you think you're going to extort a confession from me, Merrick, you got another thing coming. Confession? Nonsense. I have enough evidence in my pocket to send you up for 20 years. I want you to write a letter to your cousin. I'll dictate it. Don't make any mistakes in it, for I'm going to mail it myself. Brent slumped off the table and, sweeping the desk clear of its litter, took up a pen. Begin with her address and your customary salutation. Continue as follows. In view of the uncertainty of your income from your Northwestern copper stock, I have disposed of it. Flinging the pen down, Brent shouted, Do you realize you're forcing me to write this letter? Oh, rather. That's why you're writing it. Proceed, please. Do you know what that is? Compelling me to write this? What is it? Why, it's... You think up the name for it after I'm gone. Pick up that pen. You've got that about your disposal of her Northwestern copper? Now, go on. I have taken its equivalent for you in Axion Motor Corporation, preferred. Brent hesitated and glanced up mystifiedly. I don't understand. That's unimportant, said Merrick crisply. It's none of your business, in fact. You're just acting as my clerk for the moment. You have nothing further to do in your cousin's business affairs after writing this note. Axion Motor Corporation preferred. 500 shares listed today at 226. This stock is held by the Trust Department of the Fourth National Bank of Detroit, from where your dividends will hereafter be remitted to you regularly. How do I know that's true? Growled Brent. You don't. But, as I said, it's no affair of yours. Have you written it? Now, one more paragraph. I find that an important business errand requires me to go immediately to Buenos Aires. But I'm not going to Buenos Aires. Oh, yes, you are. Sailing on Saturday. You're just packing now. To leave for Washington to get the passport I've arranged for you. From there you go to New York, where you sail on the Vigo. Get on now with your correspondence. I do not know how long I shall be away, so I am transferring my entire responsibility of your business to the Trust Department of the Fourth National Bank of Detroit. Mr. T.P. Randall will verify this and give you a clear statement of your affairs in a short time. Now add whatever pleasant amenities you must have to the crust to write to a woman you have robbed, and sign your name to it, and address an envelope. While he wrote, Merrick took out his wallet, extracted a steamship ticket, and counted $2,000 in bills of large denomination. There. He pointed to it as Brent finished. "That is for you. Take it and be off. And if you're in the market for any advice, I suggest that you quit trying to be a sport, which you most certainly aren't. Make some new connections, find a few honest friends, get yourself a respectable job, buck up, and be a man." His face distorted. Brent fumbled with the money and blindly groped out with his hand. Merrick ignored the gesture. He is not fond of the movies. "You can get out of the country, can't you? I fixed things for you so you'll have no trouble about the passport, unless you're wanted for some other crime. I'm sure you'll not be stopped. Haven't been robbing anybody else besides your little cousin, have you?"
No, God, but I've been a rotter.
Collapsing in his chair, Monty buried his tousled head in his arms. "You don't have to remain a rotter, Brent. Start fresh. Go straight. You can do it. I'm going now. If you have any trouble getting off, wire me. There's my card. And I presume I needn't tell you that Mrs. Hudson is never to know anything about this little transaction of ours."
"You mean," said Brent, looking up perplexed, "that she's not going to know that you've given her all this money? What do you expect to get out of it?"
"That's my business." "No, I think I'll tell you. Just to clear your mind of any nasty suspicion that my obligation to her may be somehow to her discredit. Do you recall the story of her husband's death?" Brent nodded. "Do you remember the young man resuscitated while Hudson was drowning?"
"Yeah, I remember. Some rich guy. By God, it was you!"
"Yes. My life was saved that day by a machine which might have brought Dr. Hudson around if he'd had a chance at it. Had Hudson lived, you would not have squandered Mrs. Hudson's money. Do you understand now?"
"Was that why you became a doctor, too?"
inquired Brent, wide-eyed. "That would be a good enough reason, but no matter about that. I just wanted you to know the nature of my interest in your cousin. I don't give a damn what you think about me, but I'd prefer you think straight about her."
"So, you figured he had handed your life back to you, sort of, and you had to make good with it? Is that it?"
"Something like that." For a long time, Brent sat staring up glassily, and when he spoke, his voice came from a distance.
"God, I never heard of such a thing. And here you've just handed my life back to me. If I were the kind of person you are, I suppose I'd have to do something about it, wouldn't I?"
"Oh, not necessarily. I was a good while debating whether to do anything about my affair. I was a pretty rummy lot, Brent. I'd have ducked it if I could."
"How do you mean? Rummy? Hadn't stolen anything, had you?"
"Never needed to steal anything. Had everything. Had too much. Corrupted a lot of people with it. You've had too little. I suppose that's the main difference between us."
"Do you think there's anything I could do to square up for what you've done for me?"
"Perhaps. Is that the sort of thing that interests you?"
"What, for instance?"
Merrick rose and took up his coat. "You'll have to figure that out for yourself."
"I'd like to, said Brent earnestly.
"You mean that?" challenged Merrick, putting both hands on Monty's shoulders and looking him squarely in the eyes.
"Yes. More than I ever meant anything in my life."
It seemed to Monty that his athletic young benefactor would never emerge from the brown study into which his words had driven him. He stood, leaned against the table, hands deep in his pockets, oblivious to his surroundings. "In that case," he said slowly, "I presume I'll have to help you. I don't want to, but there's just a slim chance that... See here. You shave and dress for dinner. I'll be in the lobby when you come down. We'll eat. and I'll tell you all I know about it. After that, it'll be up to you. But I put some iodine on those scratches. Sorry I hurt you. They went in a taxi to a downtown restaurant. It was somewhat after the dinner hour, and their table in the corner permitted them to talk undisturbed. Counseled to forget the experience of the past 2 hours, Monty had regained his self-confidence and listened with rapt attention to his host. If it was not good soil for the reception of a new idea, it was for no lack of sufficient plowing and harrowing. I'm going to tell you a strange story, Brent, about a sculptor named Randolph. If it seems incredible to you, I shall not be surprised. It was to me when I first heard it. It was a long story. Dinner courses came and went. In the hour, Monty hadn't spoken but once. He'd quite lost his mind, hadn't he? Dessert glasses had now been pushed aside and cigars lighted. Of course, Merrick was saying. If you should decide to experiment with this projection of yourself through investments in other people, you must be prepared for all manner of failures, disillusionments, disgusts. You'll frequently go to no end of trouble and expense for somebody who turns out to be a pest and a piker. You will be imposed upon, lied to, lied about. You will run into cases of ingratitude so rank it will sicken you, but now and again, you'll manage to put the thing over, and when you do, you will discover it has squared for all the failures you've had. He paused, and his mood seemed reminiscent. I expect you're wondering, risked Monty, whether you've been wasting your time and money on me. So far as the money's concerned, I'm afraid that wasn't an investment in you. I just wanted to get rid of you. But you're quite right about my wondering whether it's really been worthwhile to confide to you this theory of personality projection. Do you mind if I inquire whether you think it would give you additional personal power in your undertakings if I managed to make good? Oh, unquestionably. And if it ever got out that you had started me on the way up, then this whole investment of yours in my behalf would be a total loss to you. Merrick smiled and toyed preoccupiedly with his ashtray. Well, no. Randolph was a bit obsessed, you know. He was for breaking people's necks if they told of his investments in them. That was going it rather stronger than necessary. Hudson was careful to caution his beneficiaries against telling, and threw every possible safeguard around his investments to protect them from discovery. But I don't believe he felt that they hadn't been worth doing if the facts leaked out. The really important feature of it is here. If you exceed in expanding your personality, I shall come in on the reward by just as much as if I'd been responsible for it. In the process of expanding yourself, you are almost sure to help somebody else make himself bigger. He, in turn, energizes other people. If you know anything about chemistry, you will be helped by considering this is a process of catalysts. Personality projections like any other investment. The thing goes on. It earns compound interest. If you were the agent that set it going, the credit's yours. Some of it will be going at full blast long after you have been declared dead. In actual fact, the real you may be more alive as to personality energy 50 years after you're gone than when you seem to be at the top of your power. But if your beneficiary does not succeed in making good on the investment, Merrick shrugged. In that case, you can see for yourself that nothing comes of it. But you tried. Isn't there any satisfaction to be had of that? Oh, it's good practice, I suppose. But if you had spent $20,000 and in 6 months' time sinking an oil shaft and got nothing but a dry hole, would you have had much satisfaction in reflecting that, at all events, you'd tried? When they parted at the curb, Brent said, May I write to you sometimes and report? Glad to have you. But you needn't try to tell me what you're doing for anybody else. That's your affair. Write and tell me if it works, but not what you did to make it work. You get me? Good luck. Goodbye. Bobby went to the Ritz-Carlton for the night, stood for a long time at the counter of the Western Union office in the lobby trying to compose a cable to Vienna. Gave it up. Bought a few magazines and took the elevator. Having made himself comfortable in a dressing gown, he drew up to his desk and wrote, Dear Marion, I've been racking my brain for a solution to your problem, but nothing comes. You have lost a friend, and I see no way for you to regain her at present. I learned tonight that she is in Nice. But I don't want you to go there seeking a reconciliation, for you wouldn't do it without making things bad all around. You'd be obliged to say that you went to Bellagio as my agent to discover what had happened to her money. I've arranged, guided by your report, for the complete untangling of her affairs. She has recovered in full. But the machinery devised to effect this restoration of her property without offense to her is frail enough. I believe and hope it will go, but it won't stand any wrenches being tossed into it. The postscript to your letter broke me all up. She left Bellagio about 4, you said, drenching rain, heartsick and betrayed, by you and me, who would have laid down and died for her. Stuffy little steamer to Como, probably spent the night there, or maybe caught a train over to Milan, wondering where to go, what to do next. My dear, was there ever a more pitiful state of things? Consult Jack about this. Ask him if he sees any other way out. If neither you nor he can think of a plan by which you can communicate her without jeopardizing everything we've tried to do for her, better keep away. I'm devastated over the situation, but there you are. Then he wrote a letter to Helen, which he had no intention of mailing, tore it into small bits, undressed, went to bed, tried to read, turned out the light, relaxed. For a long time it had been his custom, just before dropping off, to attempt an inward look. His corridor, as he called it, was of course a mere hallucination developed and encouraged by his own quest of it. He had long since decided that the corridor was but an eccentric property of his own imagination, located somewhere in that no-man's land between fading consciousness and sleep. It amused him to search for it, and by practice he had been able to arrest the clouding of his consciousness at the exact phase where his curious phantom resided. The clearness of it depended upon his mood, and his mood, in respect of the corridor, was determined by the projects he happened to be working on in the field of personality projection. Usually a very thin, faint pencil of promising yellow light streaked down the middle of the corridor's rough flagging. The flagging was always rough, as if paved with cobblestones. There would be but an instant of it. The big doors would part, and the light would shine through, just enough to nourish a great hope. Tonight, perhaps because of the investment he had made, his intense concentration upon the subject he had endeavored to make clear to Brent, and the emotional strain incident to both his mood, he found, was unusually conducive to a materialization of the corridor. As he neared the gray twilight of consciousness, it came sharply into focus. The doors, instead of parting a little, slowly, tentatively, were opening. The corridor was flooded with a shimmering radiance. After that, events moved with bewildering swiftness. The corridor suddenly seemed objectified, a thing apart from himself, as he walked into it. A terrific roar deafened him. Finding the blinding glare at the big doors too painful to face, he turned his attention to the objects against the wall, blinking in an effort to accommodate his eyes to the dazzling light. All endeavors to recall afterwards exactly what he saw there were futile. They belonged to a narrowly restricted phase of half-consciousness and were not to be reconstructed elsewhere. He was left only with a very hazy impression that he had seen his own laboratory, the oven, the black switchboard, the little vise screwed to the table. His diminutive blast furnace was at top heat. White flames jutted out about the hinges. Doubtless that accounted for the roar. There was also a nebulous recollection left that the door of the 5-foot cabinet, containing all the apparatus he had been at such pains to manufacture over a period of many months, stood wide open. He had almost decided, a few days earlier, to dismantle it and have it carted off before some inquisitive colleague in the hospital discovered what an audacious thing he had in mind and chaffed him about. Well, be he waking or sleeping, sane or crazy, there it was. In the lowest compartment, there was a box containing the vacuum tubes, but they were not arranged in the order of the tubes in his cabinet. He had summoned all his effort to concentrate on that illusory tube box, and the exertion aroused him to full consciousness. Tossing aside his bedclothes, he leaped out, drenched with perspiration and trembling so he could barely stand. For an hour, he sat at his desk, drawing diagrams of another experimental hookup of his tubes. He was unable to shake off the impression that he was on the edge of discovery. A strange sensation of exultancy possessed him. Mechanically putting on his street clothes, he went down into the deserted lobby and sought the outer air. For miles and miles he walked, neither knowing nor caring where he went. Walked with long strides, seeing nothing. Utterly absorbed by the curious experience that still clung to him like a garment, when dawn broke, he found himself down at the ferry docks. Returning to the hotel, he bathed, breakfasted, and drove to the station. Securing a compartment, he went to bed and slept dreamlessly all day. When he awoke, it was dark, and for a moment he was unable to recall where he was. Then remembrance came, and he smiled broadly. A strange sense of mastery exalted him. He laughed and recalled Randolph. Randolph had laughed. Randolph had found the grass greener, everything turned up to a higher key, every sensation more intense. He laughed as Randolph had laughed. At once, I thought him crazy. He sat on the edge of his berth and stared hard at the shiny mahogany walls of his apartment, his eyes wide with the interest of his pleasurable self-analysis. He laughed. And once I thought Hudson was crazy. The jolting of the trucks over the rail ends and the clank of chains and the wall of flanges tortured by a sharp curve stirred him out of his rhapsody. The sound of his own laughter still echoed in his brain. He rubbed his forehead roughly with the back of his wrist and swallowed with a dry throat. My God, he groaned. I wonder if I'm going mad. Chapter 14. Young Merrick discovered within a week that when a man begins to suspect he has slipping mentality, his disorder fattens on himself. He became morbidly introspective, exaggerated the significance of his little tricks of manner, caught himself doing things automatically, and wondered what else he might have been doing of which he had no recollection. Then, in the course of 2 hours, one Friday morning, Pyle had said, "You're not quite Pa these days. Something bothering you?" Watson had said, "I'll look after the Weber case, Merrick. She had a notion you're too young. Silly nonsense, but we'll have to humor her." Nancy Ashford had said,
"What is it, Bobby? Tired?"
That settled it. At noon, he told Pyle he was going out to the country for a couple weeks. He spent the afternoon gutting the little laboratory, assisted by an orderly who packed the apparatus into boxes. His first intention was to store the stuff in his suite of rooms near the hospital. On second thought, he shipped the whole of it out to Windermere. Perhaps he might amuse himself if time dragged. Farmers along the roads near Lake Saguenay grew accustomed to the sight of a tall, slender chap in knickers and white sweater, walking rapidly on the highway. Learned who he was. Vainly speculated about the cause of his leisure. One tale had it that he was discharged from the hospital for drunkenness. Another that he had decided to give up medicine and loaf. Meg's curiosity, reaching that state of compression which demanded that he either blow off or blow up, ventured to inquire of Bobby why he had come home, and was informed that his young master was recovering from a slight touch of leprosy. Old Nicholas aged markedly during the first week, but made a gallant effort to disguise his worry, a well-intended deceit which added to his grandson's anxieties. The old man's excessive solicitude annoyed him. He reproached himself for making wild remarks for the sole purpose of seeing to what ridiculous lengths he might lead his grandpeer in assenting solemnly to his nonsense. "Believe I could persuade him a cloud resembled a camel," thought Bobby, and then talk him into the notion that it looked like a hawk. More than 2 weeks had passed before he had any inclination to rig his laboratory. Somehow it seemed related to his mental dishevelment, and the thought of it had been repugnant. One morning at breakfast, he announced impulsively that he wanted the use of an attic room for a workshop. Nicholas was delighted. Carpenters, plumbers, and electricians were in the house before noon, taking orders from a young scientist who obviously knew exactly what he wanted, surprising them with the breadth of his practical information about their trades. That night at dinner, Bobby was more like himself than he had been at any time since his homecoming. The farmers who lived near the highway missed him, presumed he had finished his vacation, or he had been reinstated at the hospital, or had gone gallivanting to furtin parts. Old Nicholas worried about him now more than ever, feared his close confinement in the attic would do him harm. Bobby rarely came down to the first floor. Most of his meals were sent up to him, and as often as not, the tray was returned almost untouched. It was on Thursday about 9. Lights in the laboratory had burned all Wednesday night. Bobby was haggard and stubbly with 3 days' beard. Meggs had tried the door, found it locked, had knocked, and been told to go away. Taking in his left hand the tiny knife, attached to the end of a long green cord, Bobby reached up and slowly moved the lever along the dial of the rheostat. The little scalpel came alive. For a long time he sat there on his laboratory stool with the dynamic thing in his hands, too deeply stirred to make a sound, trembling with ecstatic happiness. Then he switched off the current, put down the scalpel on the bench, rose, stretched his long arms until every fiber was at top torsion, and laughed boyishly. Old Nicholas was quite swept off his moorings when Bobby strode into the library, shaggy as a tramp, hollow-eyed, pasty from lack of sleep, and said he wanted to use the telephone. "Is anything the matter, Robert?" he quavered, rising hurriedly and taking him by the arm. Bobby shook his head and smiled. The operator was in the process of giving him his connection. "I want to talk to Dr. Pyle. Nancy?" "No, everything's quite all right. Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Pyle? I wish you would come out here." "Yes, very urgent." "That's fine. Thanks. Bring your bag along. We'll put you up." "What's it all about, son? Feel all right?" Nicholas had dropped into a chair and his face was twitching. "Very much all right," shouted Bobby, patting him on the shoulder. "I'll tell you about it after a little. I want to run up and shave first. Then I want my breakfast. Meggs, I'll be down again in a half hour for a thick slice of ham, 2 eggs turned, a pair of flapjacks, and a pot of strong coffee." Dr. Pyle was consumed with curiosity when he arrived. Nicholas could not tell him exactly what he wanted. He was to go up to the attic when he came. Robert wished to see him there. "You can come along, Grandpere," called Bobby from the head of the stairs. Nicholas trudged wheezily after Pyle, and they entered the laboratory. "Hello, Dr. Pyle," greeted Bobby radiantly. "Got something to show you. Wanted you to be the first to see it." He held up the gleaming little scalpel, dependent from yards of green-clad wiring leading to a tall cabinet. "Take it in your hand. Now look." He stepped to the switchboard and drew a lever. "Look out," he warned as Pyle lifted the knife for closer inspection. "Don't let it burn you. Know what it is, don't you?" Pyle slowly nodded his head, eyes still intent upon the glowing blade. "Huh. Cuts and cauterizes instantly, eh? Huh. Takes care of the hemorrhage as it goes, eh? Huh. Well, that means we're to have some new brain surgery, doesn't it?" He reached out a hairy hand. "I needn't tell you what you done, Merrick. Thank you for letting me the first to congratulate you." Then turning to old Nicholas, who had been standing by, his face puckered with baffled curiosity, he also extended his hand to him. "Mr. Merrick, your grandson has invented a device that will completely revolutionize brain surgery and make a new science of it.
Operations which have never yet been successfully performed will now be comparatively safe. Within the next 30 days, his name will be as familiar in the clinics of Europe as yours is among manufacturers of motor cars. Old Nicholas's chin vibrated spasmodically. All he could say was, "Indeed? Indeed?" He threw an arm around his grandson's broad shoulders and mumbled, "Why, Bobby, indeed?" Pyle could not stay the night, but consented to remain for dinner, which was called earlier than usual for his convenience. When he had gone, old Nicholas and Bobby, deep in their chairs in the library, talked of the invention. To the latter's pleased surprise, the old man asked questions which showed with what tenacity he had retained his interests in physics, for there had been a time when Nicholas Merrick had to know a great deal about electricity. Bobby was so delighted with the lucidity of his grandfather's queries and the comments that he drew the small coffee table between their chairs and proceeded to make a detailed diagram of his coagulation cautery. Nicholas followed with keen attention. "It was the vacuum tubes that had you stumped, eh? And the sex of that came, you say, a sort of bolt out of the blue? How do you mean?" "Did you ever go to bed, Grandpierre, with a problem on your mind, and find in the morning that you'd worked it out somehow, in your sleep?" Nicholas rubbed his jaw. "I've heard of such things. Can't say I ever had that experience myself. Was that what happened to you?" Bobby pushed the table away and shifted his chair until their knees touched. "Grandpierre," he said, soberly, "I'm going to tell you something that you may have trouble believing. It's a long story, and I'll have to begin at the beginning." Nicholas's contribution to the conversation during the next hour and a half was limited to an occasional, "Indeed. Incredible. You don't tell me." When finally Bobby had made it into it, the old fellow sat for a long time in deep meditation. "I had never suspected, Bobby, that you were interested in religion." "Not sure that I am, Grandpierre. But that's what this is. You've been talking about this major personality that supplies our personalities with added energy, and we ask for it and obey the rules for getting it. Well, that's God, isn't it?" "Doubtless. Just another way of saying it, maybe." "I've always shied off the subject, Bobby, but of late it has been much on my mind. I'm quite disturbed these days. I'm in a mental revolt against death. It's sneaking up on me, and there's nothing I can do about it. Death holds all the trump cards. It takes me a little longer to get out of bed in the morning than a month ago. It's just a bit harder to climb the stairs than it was last week. The old machine is running down. I don't want to die. I understand that when a man actually faces up to it, nature compounds some sort of an anesthesia which numbs his dread and makes it seem right enough, but that thought brings me small comfort. I have been accustomed to meeting all my emergencies with my eyes open, and I don't get much consolation out of the thought that I'm to be doped into a dull apathy like a convict on the way to execution. As I face this last one, I wouldn't mind so much if there was anything after that. Bobby, do you believe in immortality?" "I wish I was as sure of a few other things that bother me," replied Bobby instantly, "as I am of the survival of personality. Once you've experienced vital contact with the major personality, Grandpierre, you become aware that the power of it is quite independent of material things. So, to my mind, it's clear. Personality is all that matters. The roses in that vase have no meaning for each other, no meaning for themselves. A tiger doesn't know that he's a tiger. Nothing in the world has any reality except as it is declared real by our personalities. Count personality out of the scheme, and there's no difference left to anything. Include personality in the scheme, and the whole business is automatically explained. I've thought a good deal about the soul lately, Grandpierre. It strikes me that the things
one reads about souls are frightfully misleading. They inquire, what are you going to do for and with your soul, as they might ask, when are you going to turn in your old car? I can't say my soul as I would say my hat or my canoe or my liver. I am a soul. I have a body. My body's wearing out, and when I can't tinker it back into service anymore, I'll drive it out to the junk pile, but I don't have to be junked with it. I'm tied up to the major personality. Like a beam of sunshine in the sun. I'll not lose my power unless he loses his. If that's religion, Grandpierre, I'm religious. But I'd rather think of it as science. Bobby, are you a Christian? That's what I'd like to know myself, Grandpierre. For some time I'd been very much absorbed by the personality of Christ. Here was the case of a man who had made absolutely ideal adjustment to his major personality. He professed to have no experience of fear. He believed he could have anything he wanted by asking for it. The story interests me at the point of his bland assurance that anybody else could do the same thing if he cared to. I'm amazed that more people aren't interested in that part of it. Now, if that's being Christian, I'm a Christian. Is that what the church teaches, Bobby? I'm sure I don't know, for I never go to them. From what I gather, they approach this whole subject sentimentally. They regard the soul as a sort of congenital disease that ought to be cured. Soul has been passed along from one common carrier to another like a trunk with a bent lock and a broken hinge labeled received in bad order, and as for the things you read in the papers about the churches, either they're campaigning for money to build something, or helping to elect a new prosecuting attorney, or stopping a prize fight, or panning some other sex belief, or raising hell with one another inside their own ballywick. Maybe you and I had better start a church, eh, Grandpierre? Very good, proved Nicholas, grinning. I'll build it, and you be the parson. It'd be just like the rest of 'em. Nobody'd want to go to the bother and expense of making his own connections with his major personality. He'd decide to sing about power. Fancy? Singing about power. Watt didn't sing for his, and Faraday didn't produce the dynamo by reciting, I believe in Volta, maker of the dry battery and father of the Leyden jar, in his successor Ampere, who codified the formulae for electrodynamics. Then in Ben Franklin, who went at it with the kite. No, sir. By the great horn spoon, no. Faraday did his in an attic, alone, on an empty stomach. He rose with a prodigious yawn and sauntered toward the door. I'm off to Brightwood early in the morning. Think I'd better turn in? Old Nicholas struggled heavily to his feet. Bobby, I'm not physically able to go around trying to nose out some opportunity to experiment with your theory. Keep your eyes open. Let me know if there's anything I can do. You arrange for it. I'll furnish the money. That wouldn't get you anywhere. You can't do this with a checkbook. By the way, did you know that old Jed Turner up the road here had to kill 17 of his Holstein cows last week? State vet confirmed them as tuberculosis. Jed's all broken up about it. I wonder if he has a telephone. Oh, you can easily send for him to come over. Nicholas's eyes brightened. He rubbed his hands. Thanks for telling me, Bobby. I'll let you know how it comes out. That you won't. I never want to hear about it again. Maybe you were thinking of doing it yourself, said Nicholas. If so, I'll not get into it. Nah, Holsteins are not in my line. That's your job. And Grandpierre, while you're over in that neighborhood, I noticed the other day that Jim Abbott's 10-year-old boy's dragging a leg in a brace. Didn't look right to me. Why don't you hop into your car tomorrow and have Stephen drive you about through the district? You'll be amazed what it does to you to make connections with people who need you. Oh, I know you've done a lot. It was the big stuff when you contributed $100,000 to the hospital in Axion, but you couldn't do it without getting your name on a bronze tablet in the main hall. You drop in at Jim Abbott's and inquire all about the boy. If they ask you to stay for noon dinner, corned beef and cabbage, you stay. I know you can't eat boiled cabbage at home, because it isn't good for you. But you'll be able to eat it at Abbott's, and it won't hurt you a bit. I'll guarantee you that on my honor as a medic. Right along to bed. Nicholas slapped him vigorously on the back. Glad we had this talk. Glad your worries are all over. Now you can be happy again. I'm not looking for happiness, Grandpierre. She's out of my reach. Since when was happiness a she? Mine is. Gonna tell me about that, too? Sometime, maybe. Good night, Grandpia. Chapter 15. The Aquitania had crept up the river that morning with exasperated caution. It was the day before Christmas. The more impatient compared tedious experiences and customs, hoped goodwill toward men might have percolated through to the baggage inspectors. Wonder if they could get Pullman space on the 245 in case they missed the 120. Her furs muffled high about her throat, Helen Hudson ventured to the frosty rail of B deck as they passed the battery, and found the stinging breeze a bit strenuous. She had avoided 3 consecutive winters, and the fast trip from Nice to New York had not been free of discomfort. A spluttery scrawl from Joyce accounted for her sudden decision to return. She had read the letter on a stone beach by the seawall, a stone's throw from the casino pier, 1 week ago this morning. It had been that kind of journey.
All packed and waiting for the taxi, Joyce had begun, going back to Detroit. Why Detroit, I don't know, unless it's because it seems to offer something like Anchorage. I'll try to find some employment there. Anything to occupy my mind. This past month has been a nightmare. Quite unendurable. Last night, Tom struck me a savage blow on the breast with his fist, deeply penitent afterwards, wailed his remorse like a little child, but I told him I'd had enough. I'm through. He left early in this morning, ashamed and glum. He thinks I'll be here when he gets home tonight, though I made it plain enough I was leaving. I wondered, darling, would it be asking too much of you to come back and be with me for a few weeks? I do need some good counsel. I'm bitterly lonely. It's a shame to drag you back to Detroit in midwinter, but could you? I've nobody but you. I need you desperately. Cable me at the Statler. I'll be wild with joy if you say you'll come.
It had taken only an hour to decide. Creasing the letter with puzzled fingers, she had risen and walked mechanically along the Promenade des Anglais for fully half a mile. Had slowly retraced her steps, past the Negresso and the Rue, so deep in her problem she barely noticed the strollers recruited from a dozen nations. By the time she had reached the little park fronting the jetty, Helen was ready to concede that Joyce had won her case. She had called the roll of all the alternatives to a return trip. Why not cable Joyce to come over? But no, Joyce had set on her heart on finding some employment. She would find none along the Riviera. Joyce wanted to begin life again. She couldn't do lounging in Nice. Joyce was bitterly lonely. Well, Nice wouldn't help that very much. After all, she did owe Joyce some attention. She must go. It was almost as busy an afternoon as the one on which she had impulsively migrated from Bellagio. Slowly the big ship warped into her slip. Sleety, salty hawsers were wound upon huge rumbling spools somewhere deep in her vitals. The covered gangways were hauled up from the dock and opened to the swarm of restless homecomers. Almost everybody had located wide, expectant eyes in the steam-breathing crowd that huddled at the openings of the wharf shed. Helen felt very much alone. She exchanged tentative goodbyes with the few friends she had made on board. Doubtless she would be bumping into them again at customs. Already a nervous little caucus convened under the Big H, halfway down the drafty warehouse where a pile of luggage was rapidly accumulating. Some sat on their trunks with the resigned despair of the shipwrecked on a desert island. Some, less experienced, squatted before their gaping bags and contemplating last-minute amendments to their declaration slips. Young Mrs. Hudson had done a minimum of collecting in Europe, but it was amazing how many things one unwittingly came into possession of in the course of a mere 3 years of foreign travel. As she neared her letter, she met a pair of officials headed also in that direction and told them that she was hopeful of spending at least part of Christmas Day with relatives in Detroit. She had led them to her belongings and indicated which pieces they were to put the stickers on. She could have brought in the crown jewels that morning. To her delight, the 3 o'clock train was not crowded, but why should it be? It was Christmas Eve. Normal people were at home. The thought depressed her. For a little while, as the train roared through the tunnel, she missed a home as she never had before. There was a pleasurable excitement, however, in this return to Detroit. She and Joyce had been very close. Whatever of constraint had come upon their comradeship in the last trying winter when she had attempted so unsuccessfully to keep the girl from utterly ruining herself, Joyce's urgent need of her drove all that into oblivion. And there were many other friends in Detroit she would be happy to see again. The Burns. Should she go out to see Mrs. Ashford? Why not, indeed? Mrs. Ashford had been good to her. It might be thought strange if Dr. Hudson's widow returned to Detroit and failed to call at Brightwood. Perhaps it would serve the purpose if she invited Mrs. Ashford downtown for luncheon and a matinee. It wouldn't be necessary to go out to the hospital. Dr. Pyle would be glad to see her, of course, but she would call on the Pyles at their home. Besides, it would be awkward meeting people one scarcely knew anymore, and being expected to remember their names. And as for that glassblower who meddled in people's affairs and sent spies about to report on their movements, one would be almost sure to encounter him. Why should he want to blow glass anyway? Imagine a brain surgeon spending his time in such silly business. The sky was the color of wood ashes. Big snowflakes, flattened against the pane, crumbled, edged toward their lower corner of the sash. No matter where they struck and spattered, or how slowly they made their way, sooner or later, quickly or slowly, they eventually arrived in the corner and packed themselves down hard against the others. Her thoughts were like that. Let them strike where they would, they all contrived to bring up at one spot. She was impatient about it. Tugged herself free of her reveries, returned to the magazine story, and reread with utter disinterest the page that had failed to register. Would it pay to take the coupe out of the storage garage? She had not driven on icy streets for so long. Had she lost her nerve? Skidding was dangerous. She watched a snowflake creep across the pane. Her eyes grew reminiscent, tender. She bit her lip. Her cheeks were flushed. Then, vexed with herself, she shifted her position and took up the magazine with resolution. Had Joyce been effectually cured of her drinking? Would she drift into her old habits once she had renewed connections with her Detroit set? And be brought in at all hours maudlin and stupid? An unusually big snowflake went scuttling across the glass, clawing for a hold, but unable to stand out against the rule for all snowflakes on this plane. For a brief instant she was in his arms, and she felt his lips pressed hard against her own. She threw down the magazine and rang the bell for a table. A game of solitaire might divert her. It was pleasant to be back in an American dining car, and, all things considered, it would be better to invite Mrs. Ashford to take an afternoon off and come downtown. Our diners were so much nicer than the European ones, where the passengers were organized into platoons and given so many minutes to devour each course. What a pity she had felt she had to sell her Brightwood stock. Would it make any difference in her relations with Mrs. Ashford? It was bitterly cold that night as the long train clanked and creaked and screamed along the east bank of the Hudson, and, crossing the bridge at Albany, thrust its black muzzle into the face of a blinding blizzard. But the scurrying landscape, blurry with snow, did not seem so bleakly inhospitable as she had feared. In her berth she raised one elbow, drew aside the blind, and watched the sleet-trimmed trees and fences skimming by, half glad she was returning. She snuggled down with her furs against her cheek and drifted off into an extended debate with somebody, whether she wasn't under sort of an obligation to call at Brightwood, if only for a moment. Joyce was at the gates, dancing gleefully, arms outstretched as she sighted her beloved emerging from the concourse tunnel, pursued by two porters, staggering under bags plastered with foreign labels. There were some murmured tendernesses, and a moment later they were careening around the circle. Tire chains rattling merrily, bubbling with excitement, Joyce tried to tell half a dozen stories at once.
First thing I did, darling, when I arrived weeks ago, I went out to see Nancy Ashford. Isn't she the dearest thing? But you hardly knew her. Well, she's regular. I went out to Brightwood and told Nancy all about it. How I couldn't stick it another minute, and had to leave him. And could I possibly find anything to do just from keep going crazy? And what do you think? They had just lost a fire clerk. And would I like to do that for like a week or two? To find out how he would react to the discipline of office hours, and meanwhile we could all be thinking and inquiring for something permanent. But I don't mind if nothing turns up for a while. Really, it isn't dull work at all, and I quite like it.
Oh, you've begun it already?
The same afternoon. Just took off my hat and went to it. Honestly, it's a lark. Of course, I knew several of the people, Dr. Pyle and Dr. Carter, and the red-headed Watson boy who's grown a mustache and glasses since I last saw him, and fully a dozen of the older nurses, and my dear, you should see the Merrick person. Don't frown that way. I knew you never liked him.
You mean I never knew him?
Of course. That was the whole trouble. You never met him but once, on that awful night. Ugh, that night.
Helen patted her hand.
Forget it. We'll never mention it again.
Joyce brightened and resumed her monologue.
Well, as I was saying, all you ever knew about it was that he had a sentimental notion he must study surgery to take to your dad's place. And you thought it was a piece of impudence, didn't you? Listen, he's gonna come near doing it. Do you know what Bobby Merrick's up and done? He invented a thing.
The taxi scraped against the curb, and the doorman was reaching for the baggage.
Look, isn't this foxy? Prattled Joyce as they entered the lobby. All done over. Let's go straight through to luncheon. I'm starving. There's a place by the window. Duck. That's Christmassy.
Oh, what were you saying about your work at the hospital when I interrupted you?
Asked Helen, as the waiter moved away, scribbling on a card.
What was I saying? Oh, yeah, about Bobby. He's made an electrical thing that's like bringing head surgeons here from all over. I don't know exactly what it is, some sort of charged knife. Awfully complicated. They're doing operations with it at Brightwood that had never been done anywhere before. Something that like prevents hemorrhages or something. Nancy Ashford told me about it, but she couldn't explain it very well. I saw it. Big, tall, wooden case full of the most intricate machinery you ever saw.
Glass things?
Uh-huh. How did you know?
Well, they always do have a lot of things made of glass whenever they use electricity, don't they?
Naturally. Have some of that wonderful celery, darling. Only celery in the world, you know. And handsome. My word. Honestly, I wouldn't have known him. And he always was good looking. But the change in him is simply marvelous. I'm half afraid of him. Oh, very professional, crisp. No nonsense, no siree. And the nurses are all wild and crazy about him, and he doesn't know they're existing. He's doing some of the most important cases out there now. Calls me Mrs. Masterson. Isn't that idiotic? Nancy says it's because I'm employed there. Funny, don't you think?
Helen thought it was funny. Thought the whole speech funny.
Really?
Joyce leaned forward and dropped her voice.
If I had the teeniest right to, I'd lose my heart, utterly. You know I always was a little bit soft about him.
I hope you'll not be indiscreet, Joyce.
Oh, I'll take pains not to let him know I think he's nice, she reassured. But I don't want you feeling unkindly towards him. You really can't avoid meeting him, you know.
Why not?
Well, you'll be out at Brightwood, more or less, now I'm there.
I don't see how your work at Brightwood require my presence.
But you're going out, aren't you? Honestly, darling, you just have to be pleasant toward him for my sake.
For your sake?
Helen experienced a momentary wave of disappointment. In her long absence from Joyce, she had idealized her somewhat, but she was the same Joyce, whom no blunders could chasten, the same unchanged Joyce who couldn't forget anything or learn anything, hopping gaily out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yes, repeated Joyce dramatically, for my sake.
Then, said Helen slowly, I'm sorry I came back.
They ate their duck, but it wasn't very good. That night they saw The Hypotenuse. It was a rollicking comedy employing a small cast and simple materials. A young widow and her contemporary stepdaughter furtively concealed from each other throughout the first act that the late Judge Haskins' junior partner was of larger interest than was demanded by his professional service as their attorney and business counselor. Act 2 developed some delicious situations, adroitly handled. The audience was delighted. When the curtain had finally settled after several trips in response to warm applause which brought them all back together, and then reconsidered them in relays, finished with Mama and Polly, hand in hand, Joyce turned animatedly to offer comment and surprised an abstracted look on Helen's face. She apparently had not been quite prepared for the sudden onrush of lights. "You're tired, aren't you?" inquired Joyce solicitously.
"It always takes a day or two, I think, to recover from a long journey."
"Awfully jolly show, don't you think? Fancy such a mess. You and I, for instance. We'd be honest with each other, at least. I suppose we just cut the deck to see which one was to get him."
"Stuffy in here, isn't it?" said Helen. "Let's go out and prowl in the foyer. Want to?"
Joyce's incapacity for understanding the operations of her own mind was spectacularly displayed early next morning as she dressed to go to Brightwood, babbling about herself as a working girl. Breakfast had been served in their rooms. Helen, exquisite in a dainty lounging robe, was lingering over her coffee and the morning papers.
"I think it's simply marvelous," enthused Joyce into the mirror, "that I've been able to adjust so quickly to office routine, don't you? After all these years of indulging myself, sleeping late, pottering, lazing about, I'm happier than I ever thought I could be again. I know now I'll never be contented anymore without a regular job."
"I'm glad you like it," said Helen, deep in the theater advertisements. "What do people say about this new musical comedy? Jasmine?"
"Very tuneful, I hear. You like this hat?"
"Cute. Suppose Mrs. Ashford might like to come downtown tomorrow and have dinner with us and see Jasmine?"
"Oh, I'm sure she would love it. I'll ask her. And darling, she and Bobby Merrick are such pals. Wouldn't it be nice to ask him too?"
"Not a bit nice. I don't know him. I don't want to know him."
Helen's tone was frankly impatient.
"Well, you could get acquainted with him. I know him. Couldn't you consider my wishes a little?"
Joyce savagely flicked probable dust from her coat.
"Hand me my pocketbook." "There, on the mantel. Thanks."
Helen opened it and unfolded a letter.
"Oh, it's the one I wrote you. What about it?"
"Read it. You will see that you asked me to travel 5,000 miles to give you some good advice. Now that I've gone to the bother of humoring you, I hope you'll not resent it if I say that your present state of mind in regard to Dr. Merrick is absurd. If you want to be silly about him, don't annoy me with it. I won't have him thrust down my throat."
"Well, what's come over you? I hadn't heard that residents in France and Italy made people so squeamish. And it seems to me that a person with your admiration for people who do really valorous things at a lot of cost to themselves would take a little human interest in Bobby Merrick, slaving himself almost to death when, if he wanted to, he might be lounging on a yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean. I heard one of the nurses say he had come into $1 million worth of Axion Motors when he was 25, and is due for another $1 million when he's 30. I tell you, he deserves some credit. Goodbye. Don't be peeved. See you in about 5:30.
Helen rose after the door had slammed and stood looking down upon the street. Axion Motors? $1 million worth of Axion Motors? Axion? Chapter 16. Mr. T.P. Randall was extremely solicitous in his attitude toward his charming client. She had telephoned him at 10, and they had agreed on a business conference at 1:30. He was tall, 55, well-fed, grizzled at the temples. The tailor who had made his waistcoat might have succeeded as a sculptor. He rose as she entered his padded leather and dark mahogany sanctum, dignifiedly offered his hand. bowed to the top of her close-fitting gray hat from his considerable altitude, helped off the gray fur coat from the gray gown, drew out the throne-like chair for her, seated her, walked around the table majestically, sat down in his swivel chair, folded his big pink newly manicured hands on the bare desk, and said again that he was glad to see her. He mentally doubted his assertion, however, and looked more than a little troubled. Considering it highly important that he should lead the conversation into safe channels, he talked of Paris, where he had once spent a fortnight, and of Venice, where he declared he would like to live, but it was obvious from the restlessness with which she chafed the backs of her gray gloves that she had not come to hear his impressions of Europe. At the first semicolon, she leaned forward in her big chair. "You had a long talk with Mr. Brent about my affairs?" TP. He was known as TP through the Fourth National Organization. Drew an anxious smile. Now, why the devil hadn't he been told that he was supposed to have talked with his rapscallion Brent? He had been under the impression that Brent was to be presumed as having had all his business with him by correspondence. Murmured TP, deep in his throat. He gave it just that quality of indeterminateness which might make it pass either for an affirmative, or a mere receipt of information already in hand, or a promise that presently he would discourse at more length about the matter which she had quite finished her remarks. But she was not going to be contented with his He saw that at a glance. Mrs. Hudson smiled, a bit roguishly. "There was one man you had to look up to, is it not so?" Her syntax was unfortunately under continental influence. It made the query difficult to evade. My, was this innocent child with the wide blue eyes leading Detroit's most resourceful sidestepper into a trap? Well, he'd follow along and see what came of it. Of a sudden he remembered. He brightened. He tossed up an outspread hand. "Rather uncommonly tall. Your cousin, I think." "Yes," agreed Mrs. Hudson. TP took a long breath, exhaled it luxuriously, and felt relieved. "Must be 6'3", isn't he?" "About my height," said Mrs. Hudson, "but he is my cousin." "Oh, of course." TP laughed boisterously. "Of course. You knew I was jesting. Of course." She did not join in his merriment. "Odd that you should have forgotten," she said, meaningly. When in doubt about what to do next, TP always fell back on the didactic style. He could stun and bewilder with his voluminous vocabulary of technical terms relating to the upper ether of large finance. He settled sternly to it, ignoring their brief exchange of exploratory thrusts, and discoursed of stocks. Most industrials were good now, motors especially, Axion most assuredly. She could be confident that her money was prudently placed. Moreover, she could sleep soundly o' nights while the Fourth National looked out for her interests, and, by the way, he wanted to show her about through this fine new building before she left, if there was time. Not quite satisfied with her expression, he launched upon an oration of some length, rumbling wisely of economic trends, cycles, and the periodicity of financial mutations, now happily stabilized by the Federal Reserve. At the first full stop, she said, "I would like to see my stock certificates." "To be sure, Mrs. Hudson, of course." TP's tone was paternal. Inwardly, he chuckled. If this amazingly good-looking widow had hopes of learning how she had become possessed of her Axion motors by inspecting her stock certificates, she was about to be disappointed. She had caught him napping in respect to his relations with her ne'er-do-well cousin, and it was up to him to take the next trick in this little game. Well, she would discover nothing new, bearing on the question, from these certificates. Hadn't he told Riley to hustle those shares of Dr. Merrick's back to the Axion office to be reissued in the name of Mrs. Hudson? Of course. However, just to make doubly sure, he quite distinctly remembered having written to Blair, the transfer agent of the Axion Motor Corporation, notifying him that, beginning at once, all future dividends on that block of stock were to be forwarded to the address of Mrs. Hudson, who now owned them, and that the certificates would be brought over to him for reissuance. Surely he had remembered to tell Riley about that. To be on the safe side, he'd inquire. "I'll send for them," continued T.P., beaming amiably. "Excuse me, please." He was detaining in the adjoining office for fully 5 minutes, and when he returned, he was mopping his expansive brow with a large monogrammed handkerchief. Resuming his chair, he smiled not very happily and said, "It may take quite a little time. Had we known you would want to see them, they would have been ready for you. We have such things pretty carefully sewed away, you know." "Yes," said Helen comprehendingly. "You would have, of course." "It's rather a pity to keep you waiting so long," regretted T.P. Why the devil couldn't the woman say, "Oh, never mind about them, then"? "I can wait," she replied, settling comfortably in her big chair. T.P. drummed on the desk with anxious fingers. "You know we have them, of course, or you wouldn't be getting your dividends." "Oh, certainly." "They're just like any other. You've seen stock certificates, haven't you?" He was still amiable, but he was growing desperate. "Yes, and I would like to see these." She glanced at her watch. There was nothing more that T.P. could do about it. He pushed a button, gave an order, tried to be cheerful, tried to be nonchalant, but the conversation was unsatisfactory. Neither of them had the slightest interest in it. At length the certificates arrived, and he pushed them across the desk. She slipped the top one from under the broad rubber band, spread it out, turned it over, and noted the endorsement whereby it had been transferred from Robert Merrick to Helen Hudson. "Thank you," she said, rising. "That will be all, I think. I shall be in again tomorrow to talk further with you." T.P. did not waste time. Immediately his client had left. He took up the telephone and in his best bank manner told the switchboard to get him Dr. Merrick at Brightwood Hospital. The contact was no sooner made than T.P. went off the deep end without ceremony and reported what had happened. The answer he received consisted of a few words not properly used over the telephone, which really has to draw the line somewhere. "Now, Doc, you've got to keep your shirt on. I tell you it absolutely couldn't be avoided. It was either that or tell her we didn't have the stuff at all. Would that have improved the situation any? Hell, she suspected all along. You might have known she would. That woman's no ninny." "What say?" "Why, damned if I know, Doc. She left here. Pronto. Shot out of a gun. Bit flustered, maybe." "No, I don't know. I tell you. Perhaps she was. If so, I suppose you'll soon find out." "Well, I'm sorry as you are, Doc, but you might have..." There was a metallic click that made T.P. wince. He laid the instrument back on its rack, opened the left lower drawer of the desk, took out a bottle and a glass, poured, swallowed, sizzled, and shuddered, replaced the bottle, shut the drawer, lighted a cigar, pushed a button. "Riley, put those certificates back where you got 'em, and if anybody wants me importantly, call me at the athletic club. I've got a headache." Not often was Helen Hudson a victim of emotional stampede. Her poise was not a pose. Neither was it arrived at by effort. It was native to her. This afternoon she simply tossed the reins of discretion upon the neck of her indignation and abandoned herself to the tempestuous rush of it. Mentally, at full gallop, she hurled herself at Brightwood. It was as if a huge, ugly cauldron of anxieties, perplexities, forebodings, misgivings, and suspicions, which had been simmering and bubbling for all the dragging months, had suddenly reached that stage of the brewing when it was time to pour. A taxi waited at the door of the bank as she emerged, half blind with humiliation. She walked swiftly to it, gave the driver an order, and sat tense throughout the journey. This abominable Merrick had placed her in an impossible situation. No matter about the intent. He had doubtless enjoyed his Galahading, but he had made her his pensioner, treated her like an irresponsible child, helplessly loaded her with an obligation she would probably be unable to discharge. Well, she could disavow her willingness to accept anything further at his hands. She could return the capital of it, all at once, and set to work toward a replacement of what she had spent. Exactly what she was going to say to Bobby Merrick when she saw him, Helen had not yet determined clearly. Of one thing she was sure. She would denounce his officious meddling with her affairs and let him know exactly where he stood in her regard. He should have it all back. Oh! She pressed her shaking fingers against her eyes and tried to cool her cheeks with the back of her gloves. Barely conscious of the journey, the unhappy girl stepped out of the cab as it stopped in front of the hospital, ordered the driver to wait, she would not be long, and quickly pattered up the broad concrete walk between masses of formal shrubbery coated with glistening ice. At the desk in the snug little lobby, she inquired for Mrs. Ashford and was shown into her office, where she quite took that pretty lady's breath away with her exotic beauty.
"Why, what a joy!" cried Nancy, putting forward both hands in greeting. "I knew you were in town, and I've been so anxious to see you."
"Yes," said Helen, breathlessly, and with an effort to steady her voice. "I do want to have a sudden good visit with you, and I shall soon, but not just now. I find I have a rather sudden errand with Dr. Merrick. Could I see him? Is he here?" He was here, and she could see him. Nancy believed he had just finished an operation and would be probably at liberty. She would send him in, and they could talk in her office. Nancy went out, her own heart beating rapidly, and closed the door behind her. For a while, Helen fidgeted on the little divan, fumbled with her pocketbook, latching and unlatching and latching, tapping her little gray-shod toes impatiently on the rug. Then, unable to sit still another instant, she rose, walked to the window, and stood gazingly, preoccupiedly at the street, her fingers busy with the coral beads. At length the door was quietly opened and as quietly closed, and she was aware of his presence in the room. She knew he was standing there, just inside the door, expectant, waiting for her to turn and face him. Why in the world didn't she? Would he cross the little room and approach her? Speak to her? Perhaps not. But why didn't she turn quickly and confront him? She had asked for this interview, hadn't she? She had sent for him to come to her, hadn't she? Whatever ailed her anyway? The difficult thing about it was that she had delayed turning about to face him. Every second that passed made the situation more trying. After a young eternity, he spoke, rather unsteadily.
"You wanted to see me?"
His quiet query broke the spell for her. She turned quickly, and leaning against the window, put her outspread hands upon the sill in a pose that Bobby sorrowfully interpreted as a sort of back-to-the-wall defense, but not defiance. Her head was bowed, her eyes to the floor. It was so thoroughly against his wish and hope that whatever he had done for her should put her into this attitude. Helen was dismayed at her own sensations. 10 minutes ago she had been ready to do violence. When she had stepped to that window, she had been aflame with a passionate anxiety to call him hard names, to hurt him somehow, to let him taste a little of the humiliation he had put upon her. What had happened to her? She felt deserted even by her own rage. Well, she could not stand there silently any longer. She lifted heavy eyes to meet Bobby's. "I must have a talk with you," she said in that throaty contralto he so keenly remembered, a timbre that seemed to set up all manner of curious vibrations in him.
"Won't you shake hands?" he begged.
"No need," she said, with a little gesture of futility.
"Then will you sit down?"
"Thank you, no. I think I can say it quickly." Bobby leaned against a corner of Nancy Ashford's desk, folded his arms, and listened. "I have just discovered that everything I have in the world is yours. I have been living for some time as your dependent. I didn't know. I'm sure you will believe I didn't know."
"Of course you didn't know. You have nothing to blame yourself with in this matter."
She went on as if she had not heard. "The very clothes I have on me—" She lowered her head and covered her eyes with her outspread fingers. Bobby could stand no more. With his heart furiously pounding, he stepped quickly to her and took her hands in this. For the tiniest instant, she permitted his impulsive gesture of sympathy and then withdrew from him, shaking her head. No, I did not come here to be pitied. Her voice was firmer now, and there was a note of rising impatience in it. I've been pitied quite long enough. All I came to tell you is that all your money at the bank I am going to turn back to you, and as fast as I can possibly earn it, I shall pay you every dollar I have spent. Bobby drew a deep sigh of regret, stepped back, and leaned his weight against the desk, his eyes brooding. I'm so sorry, he said slowly. You see, the circumstances were very strange. I wanted to spare you if I could a misfortune that would bring you some unhappiness. I guess I went about it the wrong way, but I meant it all right. Won't you believe that? For a second, their eyes met in a look that each remembered later when, that night, the episode was reviewed inch by inch and word by word on sleepless pillows, Bobby solemnly wondering whether he had taken her in his arms at that moment, their difficulties might have been solved. Helen remorsefully chiding herself for what she feared was a serious disclosure of a feeling she had tried to batter into submission. Perhaps you did, she admitted, tugging herself loose from his eyes. But it doesn't make my position any more endurable. I don't propose to be pensioned by you. I'm going to give you all your money back, the capital, tomorrow, the amount I have used at the earliest moment I can earn it. You mustn't do that.
Bobby's voice was stern, commanding. He stood erect and faced her determinedly.
There's more to this than you are aware of, more than I dare to tell you. The lives of many people would unquestionably be affected. Whatever you may decide to do with that money, you can't give it back to me. I won't take it. I can't take it because, you see, I've used it all up.
Helen glanced up quickly, her eyes wide with amazement. She swallowed convulsively. What? She whispered. What is that you say?
I've used it all up. Do you know what that means?
No. Tell me. What does it mean?
Sit down, he said gently. I'll try to explain. It's not easy, though. She walked with some reluctance to the little divan and sat. Perhaps you never had it called to your attention. Bobby was feeling his way with caution. That there is sometimes a strange relation between the voluntary, secret bestowal of a gift without exception of any return or reward and certain significant results that accrue from it in the experience of the giver. Now, I am not sure that this money I was so happy to put at your disposal is not that kind of investment. Shortly after I arranged for it, something of quite tremendous importance occurred, something that dared not be trifled with by either of us. It's almost useless to try to make it convincing to you, I know. Can you just take my word for it and trust me, dear?
Helen flushed deeply and rose, her eyes flashing. No, you're not dealing squarely with me, she reported hotly. And I'm not your dear. You have humiliated me. There are many things I have wanted to know, and you seem to be able to clear up some mysteries, but you are plainly not disposed to do so. I'm going now. I shall arrange at the bank about my money, and the rest of it, the part I've spent, I shall pay that back. You can depend on it. She was at the door, her hand on the knob. Bobby stepped swiftly to her side and covered her hand with his own.
Listen, he demanded soberly. It is quite important, for both your sake and mine, that we do not set every tongue in this place wagging with the gossip that we are set to have a row. You're ready to go stamping out through the office, rosy with rage. Much curiosity will be aroused, and explanations will be in order.
Then you can make them. I do not feel that I owe anybody an explanation. If you think you do, that's your affair. Let me go, please.
Bobby did not remove his retaining hand. My dear, he said, scarcely above a whisper, I appeal to your good sportsmanship. Granted that you have cause to be indignant, granted that I have blunderingly placed you in an awkward predicament, let us at least keep our misunderstanding to ourselves, please. Compose yourself, and we'll go out to face these people as if there were no trouble between us. Wouldn't that be ever so much better?" She hesitated for a long moment, looked up searchingly into his eyes like a bewildered little child, and finally replied, "Agreed." He released her hand, and she walked to the window, took out a tiny vanity case, and consulted her reflection, Bobby regarding her repentant eyes. How wretchedly he had bungled everything. Everything. Presently she turned and faced him calmly like a stranger. "I'm quite ready, if you are." Bobby hesitated. "But, really, don't you think," he stammered shyly, "that a wee bit of a smile might help to—"
"I'll attend to that when we need it."
He opened the door and signed for her to precede him. At that instant she became another person, gracious, smiling. Nancy Ashford, who had been hovering about with curiosity and some anxiety, met them. She drew a quick breath, apparently of relief.
"I'm so glad you two have found some occasion to become acquainted at last,"
she exclaimed, searching their faces eagerly.
"Yes, isn't it?"
responded Helen, slightly confused over her cue.
Dr. Merrick and I have been talking of so many interesting things. Some of them quite mystifying, I'm afraid."
"Ah, good. So that was it. Mystifying things." Mrs. Hudson had been asking questions. Somehow she had learned, by a chance word perhaps, that Bobby Merrick was in a position to clear up the strange riddles bequeathed to her by her husband. So that was what had brought them together. Good. Nancy was radiant.
"I hope I may soon have a little visit with you, Mrs. Ashford," continued Helen, rather breathlessly. "Today I'm in something of a rush. Important errands."
At the sound of a familiar voice just outside the door of her little fitting room, Joyce came bounding into a circle with a shrill exclamation of surprise and delight and a torrent of questions. "Why, whatever brought you here, darling? Why don't you tell me you were coming so soon? And you and Dr. Merrick have actually met. How jolly. Oh, now that we have dinner we talked about. Let's do it tonight. We four, my party, and I'll get tickets for Jasmine. What do you say? Can't you come, Mrs. Ashford?" Nancy swiftly sought Helen's eyes and thought she detected a faint expression of annoyance. Should she encourage the dinner project? It was an awkward moment. Suddenly, sensing her own obligation to take a cordial interest in Joyce's proffer of hospitality, Helen smiled inquiringly, and Nancy replied,
"I should be very happy, Joyce. Thank you."
"And you can come too, can't you, Bobby?" persisted Joyce.
He studied Helen's face for a brief second and found his heart pounding when she glanced up, unmistakably interested to hear his reply. "I'll be very glad to come, Joyce." Helen glanced at her watch.
"I must be going," she said determinedly. "I'll see you all this evening, then."
The three of them accompanied her to the big, glass-paneled doors, Bobby at her elbow, obviously proposing to see her to the waiting taxi. The pair descended the snowy steps, his hand on her arm, both conscious that Nancy and Joyce were still standing just inside the door, observant. "We must talk," said Bobby cheerfully. "This game isn't over yet."
"True," agreed Helen, turning towards him with a smile that fairly dizzied him. "And from all indications, you've let us in for a whole evening of this delightful recreation. Whatever made you say you would come to that wretched dinner Joyce contrived to plan? Some more of your good sportsmanship, I suppose?"
Bobby was contrite. His face was overspread with it.
"Don't look like that," she commanded, her oddly out of tone, her tone oddly out of step with her smile. "They'll think we are quarreling."
"Well," glumly, "aren't we?" She laughed.
"As a dramatist, you seem to be better as a producer than an actor."
"But really, I was going to refuse the invitation, and then when I happened to glance at you, you seemed so friendly about it."
"What had you thought I might do, scowl at you? It was your own suggestion that we appear to be on good terms. And now, well, you have taken advantage of me, as usual."
She was still smiling. They had reached the curb. The taxi driver was churning his engine. "I'll contrive some excuse," decided Bobby, weakly. "I'm sorry."
"No, you can't do that. We're in for it, and we'll see it through. And I can promise you that my own feelings will not be apparent to anybody."
She hesitated for a moment and added,
"Not even to you. I'll guarantee not to spoil your dinner."
Bobby opened the door and helped her in. The warm grasp of her hand on her arm, of his hand on her arm, vexed her, thrilled her. Safe in her seat, she no longer felt under compulsion to make further show of amiability. The smile had vanished. He held out his hand, and she, annoyed, was obliged to accept it. He held it tightly. "Goodbye, dear," he said tenderly. "Please don't think too badly of me. I have blundered, terribly, but, my dear, I do love you so."